In a world where power is measured by the height of your office floor and the price of your suit, Marcus Chun thought he knew exactly where everyone belonged. The mahogany-paneled war room of Blackstone Industries was his kingdom, and he was its undisputed prince. Every morning, he strode through those glass doors with the confidence of a man who had never been wrong about anything that mattered. But on a cold Tuesday morning in November, Marcus would learn that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one nobody sees coming. Sometimes the janitor pushing a cart full of cleaning supplies holds more secrets than the CEO behind the corner office. And sometimes one thoughtless moment of arrogance can unravel everything you thought you knew about success, power, and the invisible threads that really move the world. This is the story of how Marcus Chun discovered that in the game of corporate chess, he had been playing checkers all along. And the woman he dismissed as nothing more than hired help. She wasn't just moving pieces on the board. She owned the entire game. Marcus Chun had always believed that success was a straight line drawn in expensive ink. At 32, he possessed everything the corporate world promised to those who played the game correctly. A corner office on the 47th floor of Blackstone Industries, a salary that made his Harvard classmates green with envy, and the kind of reputation that opened doors before he even knocked. The morning sunlight, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, painted everything in gold, and Marcus felt like Midas himself as he reviewed the quarterly reports spread across his mahogany desk. Blackstone Industries was more than just another multinational corporation. It was an empire built on strategic acquisitions, hostile takeovers, and the kind of calculated moves that made or broke entire industries. As the youngest senior vice president in the company's history, Marcus had earned his place by being ruthless when necessary and charming when it served his purposes. His secretary, Janet, appeared in the doorway with her usual efficiency. She was in her 50s, had worked at Blackstone for over 2 decades, and possessed the rare ability to anticipate his needs before he voiced them. "The board meeting is in 10 minutes, Mr. Chun," she announced, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who had seen countless executives rise and fall. "Mr. Harrison wants to review the Morrison acquisition files one more time." Marcus straightened his tie, a silk creation that cost more than most people earned in a week. The Morrison acquisition was his baby, a $2 billion deal that would cement his position as the heir apparent to CEO William Harrison. 6 months of negotiations, midnight phone calls, and carefully orchestrated meetings had led to this moment. Today, the board would approve the final terms, and Marcus would secure his place in corporate history. The war room was exactly what its name suggested, a battlefield disguised as a conference room. Located on the 48th floor, it was where Blackstone's most crucial decisions were made. The walls were lined with monitors displaying real-time market data, and the center was dominated by a massive oak table that had witnessed more corporate executions than a medieval headsman. The room's most distinctive feature, however, was not its technology or furniture, but the collection of strategic maps that covered one entire wall. These maps were not geographical in the traditional sense. Instead, they displayed Blackstone's global network of subsidiaries, partnerships, and target companies. Lines connected various entities, showing the flow of capital, influence, and strategic advantage. Different colors indicated different types of relationships: green for profitable acquisitions, blue for strategic partnerships, red for hostile takeovers, and yellow for potential targets. The maps have been updated continuously for over 15 years, creating a visual representation of Blackstone's corporate empire that was both beautiful and terrifying in its scope. Marcus had always been fascinated by these maps. They represented everything he aspired to understand about corporate strategy. Each line told a story of negotiation. Each color connection revealed a carefully calculated move in the grand game of business. He had spent countless hours studying them, trying to decode the patterns that had made Blackstone the powerhouse it was today. As he entered the war room that morning, Marcus felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with being at the center of power. The Morrison acquisition would add another green line to those maps, another victory in Blackstone's relentless expansion. He was reviewing his notes when he noticed someone moving near the strategic maps. A woman in her late 50s was quietly cleaning the area around the maps with the attention to detail that seemed almost reverent. She was dressed in the standard gray uniform of Blackstone's cleaning staff, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her movements were methodical and precise as she carefully dusted around the frames without disturbing their position. Marcus had seen her before, he thought, though he had never paid her much attention. Cleaning staff were part of the building's invisible infrastructure, like the elevators or the air conditioning system. Necessary, but unremarkable. What struck Marcus as odd, however, was the way she was looking at the maps. Most of the cleaning staff worked quickly, efficiently completing their tasks without engaging with their surroundings. This woman was different. She moved slowly, deliberately, and her eyes seemed to linger on specific sections of the maps with an intensity that suggested more than casual curiosity. Marcus glanced at his watch. The board members would begin arriving in minutes, and he needed the room to be perfect. The Morrison presentation was the most important of his career, and he could not afford any distractions. The presence of cleaning staff during such a crucial meeting would be inappropriate, possibly even a security risk given the sensitive nature of the documents they would be discussing. "Excuse me," Marcus called out, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he had perfected over years of corporate ladder climbing. The woman looked up from her work, and, for a moment, Marcus was struck by her eyes. They were intelligent, alert, and held a depth that seemed incongruous with her position. "We have an important meeting starting in a few minutes. You'll need to finish up and leave." The woman nodded politely. "Of course, sir. I just need another moment to complete this section." Her response was perfectly professional, but something about her manner irritated Marcus. Perhaps it was the way she continued working even while speaking to him, or the fact that she did not seem appropriately deferential. In Marcus's experience, service staff usually displayed a certain eagerness to please, a recognition of their place in the corporate hierarchy. This woman exhibited neither. "I'm afraid you don't understand," Marcus continued, his patience wearing thin. "This meeting cannot be delayed. You need to leave now." The woman straightened up and turned to face him fully. "I understand completely, Mr. Chun. However, these maps require careful maintenance. If they're damaged or disturbed, the consequences could be significant." There was something in her tone that Marcus found presumptuous. How dare a janitor lecture him about the importance of anything in this building? The maps were important, certainly, but they were static displays. They could survive without cleaning for one morning. "The maps will be fine," Marcus replied curtly. "What won't be fine is if the board arrives and finds cleaning staff still in the room. This is a sensitive meeting about confidential business matters." The woman studied him for a moment with those unsettling, intelligent eyes. "Mr. Chun, with all due respect, I think you might be underestimating the importance of proper care for these particular displays." That was the final straw. Marcus had been patient, he thought, even generous with his explanations. But this woman's persistence in questioning his authority was entirely inappropriate. In the corporate world, hierarchy was everything. Respect flowed upward, and orders flowed downward. This cleaning woman was disrupting the natural order of things. Without thinking, Marcus strode forward and placed his hand on the woman's shoulder, intending to guide her firmly toward the door. "Look, I don't have time for this discussion. You need to leave now." The woman resisted his pressure, not aggressively, but with a surprising steadiness. "Mr. Chun, I really must insist that you allow me to finish properly. Moving these maps requires specific knowledge." Marcus felt his temper flare. Who was this woman to insist on anything? He was a senior vice president of one of the world's most powerful corporations. She was paid to empty trash cans and dust furniture. The audacity of her resistance was beyond comprehension. "I said move," Marcus said through gritted teeth, and he pushed harder. The push was not violent, but it was firm and unexpected. The woman stumbled backward, her cleaning cart rolling away from her as she struggled to maintain her balance. For a moment, she looked genuinely surprised, as if she had not anticipated that the situation would escalate to physical contact. Marcus immediately felt a mixture of satisfaction and unease. Satisfaction because the woman was finally moving toward the door, her professional composure momentarily shaken. Unease because physical contact with an employee, even minor contact, could potentially create problems if reported. However, Marcus reasoned, who would believe a janitor over a senior vice president? And besides, she had been the one being difficult, refusing to follow reasonable instructions. I apologize for the necessity of that, Marcus said, though his tone suggested he felt anything but apologetic. But when I give instructions in this company, I expect them to be followed promptly. The woman steadied herself and straightened her uniform. For just a moment, Marcus thought he saw something flash in her eyes. Not hurt or anger, but something that looked almost like pity. Then, her professional mask slipped back into place. "Of course, Mr. Chun," she said quietly. "I understand completely now." She gathered her cleaning supplies and moved toward the door, but paused just before leaving. "I do hope your meeting goes well. The Morrison acquisition is certainly an interesting opportunity." Marcus froze. How could a janitor possibly know about the Morrison acquisition? That information was strictly confidential, known only to senior executives and board members. Security protocols at Blackstone were extensive, and sensitive information was carefully compartmentalized. "What did you say?" Marcus demanded. But the woman was already walking away, pushing her cart down the hallway with the same methodical precision she had shown while cleaning. Marcus stared after her, feeling suddenly uncertain about what had just occurred. There had been something in her voice when she mentioned Morrison, a tone that suggested familiarity rather than casual knowledge. Marcus shook his head, dismissing his concerns. Cleaning staff often overheard fragments of conversation. It was inevitable in a building where important business was conducted daily. The woman had probably picked up the name in passing and was simply trying to appear knowledgeable. It was a common enough behavior among people seeking to elevate their perceived importance. The sound of voices in the hallway announced the arrival of the board members. Marcus quickly pushed the incident from his mind and focused on the task ahead. Today would be his day of triumph, the culmination of months of careful planning and negotiation. Nothing, especially not an encounter with an overly curious janitor, would diminish his moment. CEO William Harrison entered first, his presence commanding immediate attention. At 65, Harrison had led Blackstone for over 20 years, transforming it from a regional player into a global powerhouse. He was followed by the other board members, Margaret Phillips from legal, Robert Sterling from finance, and Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the head of strategic planning. These were among the most powerful people in corporate America, and today they would approve Marcus's greatest achievement. "Good morning, everyone," Harrison announced as he took his seat at the head of the table. "I trust we're all prepared to finalize the Morrison acquisition. Marcus, this is your show." Marcus felt the familiar surge of confidence as he activated the presentation system. The wall-mounted displays came to life, showing detailed financial projections, market analysis, and strategic objectives. This was his element, the intersection of ambition and intellect that had defined his career. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, "the Morrison acquisition represents more than just another addition to our portfolio. It's a strategic masterstroke that will position Blackstone to dominate the emerging markets in Southeast Asia for the next decade." He clicked through the slides with practiced ease, highlighting Morrison Industries' manufacturing capabilities, their distribution networks, and, most importantly, their patent portfolio. Morrison held key intellectual property rights in battery technology that would become increasingly valuable as the world shifted toward electric vehicles and renewable energy storage. "The numbers speak for themselves," Marcus continued. "Morrison's current valuation is approximately $1.8 billion, but our analysis indicates their true worth considering future market conditions and patent licensing potential, is closer to $4.2 billion. We're essentially acquiring a $4.2 billion company for less than half its actual value. The board members nodded approvingly as Marcus walked them through the financing structure, the integration timeline, and the projected return on investment. Everything was proceeding exactly as he had planned. The Morrison acquisition would not only generate substantial profits for Blackstone, but would also establish Marcus as the obvious successor to Harrison when the CEO eventually retired. Margaret Phillips raised her hand. Marcus, what's our position regarding Morrison's existing partnerships in Vietnam and Thailand? I understand they have some complex arrangements with local manufacturers. Marcus had anticipated this question. Excellent point, Margaret. Morrison's Southeast Asian partnerships are actually one of their most valuable assets. Through careful negotiation, we've structured the acquisition to assume all existing contracts while positioning ourselves to expand those relationships. Our legal team has reviewed every agreement, and we're confident that we can not only maintain current production levels, but increase them by 30% within 18 months. Robert Sterling leaned forward. What about regulatory approval? Given the current political climate regarding foreign acquisitions, are we confident that this will pass scrutiny? Absolutely, Marcus replied. Morrison is a domestic company with domestic operations. While they have international partnerships, the core business remains within regulatory guidelines. We've already begun preliminary discussions with the relevant oversight committees, and initial feedback has been positive. The presentation continued smoothly for another 20 minutes. Marcus fielded every question with confidence, backed by months of research and preparation. The board's body language indicated approval, and Harrison's occasional nods suggested satisfaction with the thoroughness of Marcus's work. As Marcus concluded his presentation, Harrison stood and walked to the windows overlooking the city. Impressive work, Marcus. This acquisition has the potential to be transformational for Blackstone. He turned back to face the room. However, before we proceed with final approval, I'd like to review one more aspect of the deal. Marcus felt a slight flutter of nervousness. Harrison's tone had shifted slightly, becoming more formal and cautious. Of course, sir. What aspect would you like to examine? Harrison walked over to the strategic maps on the wall, the same area where Marcus had encountered the cleaning woman earlier. I want to understand how Morrison fits into our broader strategic framework. These maps have guided Blackstone's expansion for over 15 years, and every major acquisition must align with our long-term vision. Marcus joined Harrison at the maps, feeling confident once again. He had studied these displays extensively and was prepared to demonstrate how Morrison would integrate seamlessly into Blackstone's existing network. As you can see, Marcus began, pointing to the Southeast Asian section of the map. Morrison will serve as our anchor point for expansion into emerging markets. Their manufacturing capabilities will support our existing operations in. Marcus stopped mid-sentence. Something was wrong with the maps. The section he was pointing to, which should have shown Blackstone's current holdings in Southeast Asia, displayed something entirely different. Instead of the familiar green lines indicating successful acquisitions, there was a complex web of red connections surrounding what appeared to be a major competitor's holdings. Is there a problem, Marcus? Harrison asked, his tone now carrying a hint of concern. Marcus stared at the maps, trying to understand what he was seeing. The Morrison acquisition, which should have strengthened Blackstone's position, appeared to be surrounded by hostile territory. According to these maps, acquiring Morrison would not give Blackstone a foothold in Southeast Asia. It would place them in direct conflict with an established competitor who already controlled the region's key infrastructure. I don't understand, Marcus stammered. These maps don't reflect the information in our research. According to our intelligence, this entire region is open for expansion. Dr. Warren approached the maps with interest. Marcus, these strategic displays are updated in real time based on intelligence gathered from multiple sources. If there's a discrepancy between your research and what's shown here, we need to understand why. Marcus felt panic beginning to rise in his chest. His entire presentation had been based on the premise that Morrison would give Blackstone strategic access to underserved markets. If these maps were accurate, then the acquisition would be a costly mistake that could potentially weaken Blackstone's position rather than strengthen it. There must be an error, Marcus insisted. Our research team spent months analyzing the competitive landscape. We identified Morrison specifically because they operate in markets with limited competition. Harrison examined the maps more closely. Marcus, according to this display, Morrison's primary manufacturing facilities are located in regions where Yamamoto Industries already has exclusive partnerships with local suppliers. Acquiring Morrison under those circumstances would put us in direct confrontation with one of our most significant competitors. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Yamamoto Industries was not just any competitor. They were Blackstone's primary rival in the Asian markets. A direct confrontation with Yamamoto could trigger a trade war that would be costly for both companies and potentially devastating for Blackstone's other operations in the region. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to understand how such a massive oversight could have occurred. His research team was among the best in the industry. They had access to the same intelligence sources that fed information to these strategic maps. How could they have missed something so fundamental? Sir, Marcus said carefully, I'd like to request a brief recess to consult with my research team. There's obviously a communication breakdown somewhere in our intelligence gathering process. Harrison nodded, but his expression had grown serious. Very well. We'll reconvene in 1 hour. Marcus, I need you to understand that this kind of oversight, if that's what it is, raises serious questions about our due diligence process. As the board members filed out of the room, Marcus remained behind, staring at the maps that had just destroyed his career trajectory. The Morrison acquisition, which was supposed to be his crowning achievement, now appeared to be a potential catastrophe. But more troubling than the immediate crisis was the growing realization that he might not understand Blackstone's strategic position as well as he had believed. Marcus pulled out his phone and called his research director, demanding an immediate explanation. But even as he waited for answers, he could not shake the memory of the cleaning woman's words. The Morrison acquisition is certainly an interesting opportunity. At the time, he had dismissed her comment as meaningless chatter from someone who had overheard a fragment of conversation. Now, her tone seemed to carry a different implication entirely. Had she known something about the maps that Marcus did not? Was her reluctance to leave the room connected to some knowledge about the information displayed there? Marcus tried to recall exactly what she had said about the maps requiring careful maintenance and specific knowledge to move them. As he waited for his research team to arrive, Marcus found himself studying the strategic maps with new eyes. For the first time, he began to wonder if there was more to these displays than he had ever realized, and more to the woman he had dismissed so casually. But by then, it was already too late to ask her the questions that might have saved his career. The golden boy of Blackstone Industries was about to discover that in the corporate world, the most dangerous enemies are often the ones you never see coming. The hour-long recess felt like the longest 60 minutes of Marcus Chen's life. He had assembled his entire research team in Conference Room B, a smaller space down the hall from the war room, and the atmosphere was thick with tension and confusion. Charts, printouts, and laptop computers covered every surface as his team desperately tried to reconcile their findings with the information displayed on the strategic maps. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, his lead research analyst, was hunched over her laptop, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled from stress. She had been with Marcus's team for 3 years and had never produced anything less than exceptional work. Her confusion was perhaps more unsettling to Marcus than the crisis itself. I've triple-checked every source, Sarah said without looking up from her screen. Our intelligence indicates that Yamamoto Industries has minimal presence in the Morrison operational zones. Their partnerships are concentrated in the northern provinces, while Morrison's facilities are primarily in the central and southern regions. James Rodriguez, the team's competitive intelligence specialist spread a series of satellite imagery photos across the table. These photos from last month show Morrison's facilities operating at full capacity with no visible Yamamoto branding or infrastructure nearby. If Yamamoto had exclusive supplier relationships in these areas, we would see evidence of their presence. Marcus paced behind them, his mind churning through possibilities. Could the maps be showing projected expansion rather than current holdings? Maybe Yamamoto is planning to move into Morrison's territory after our acquisition. That's possible, admitted Dr. Mitchell, but the maps have always shown current status, not projections. Besides, if Yamamoto was planning expansion into those regions, our intelligence network should have detected preparation activities. Moving into new manufacturing territories requires months of advanced planning, supplier negotiations, and infrastructure development. Thomas Kim, the youngest member of the team, raised his hand tentatively. What if someone has been feeding us bad information? If there's been a systematic intelligence failure, it could explain the discrepancy. The suggestion hung in the air like a dark cloud. The possibility of compromised intelligence was every corporate strategist's nightmare. But Marcus had always trusted his sources implicitly. Blackstone's information network was legendary in corporate circles, built over decades, and maintained at enormous expense. Run a source verification analysis, Marcus ordered. I want every piece of Morrison-related intelligence traced back to its origin. If someone has been manipulating our data, I need to know who and why. As his team worked frantically, Marcus found himself drawn back to the incident with the cleaning woman. The more he thought about her behavior, the more questions arose. Her knowledge of the Morrison acquisition could be explained as coincidental overhearing, but her comments about the maps seemed increasingly significant. Marcus pulled out his phone and called building security. After being transferred twice, he reached someone who claimed to have authority over cleaning staff assignments. I need information about one of your employees, Marcus said, trying to keep his tone casual. A woman, probably in her 50s, silver hair, works on the executive floors. I think there might have been a scheduling mix-up this morning. The security supervisor's voice was professional but puzzled. Sir, can you be more specific about which employee you mean? We have several staff members who match that general description. She was cleaning the war room on the 48th floor this morning around 9:30. She seemed very familiar with the strategic maps display. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Sir, I'm looking at our cleaning schedules, and no one was assigned to the 48th floor this morning. The war room is only cleaned on Wednesdays and Fridays, and always after business hours for security reasons. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Are you certain? I personally spoke with this woman in the war room about 2 hours ago. I'm absolutely certain, sir. No cleaning staff would have access to that floor during business hours without special authorization, and no such authorization was issued today. Could you have encountered this person on a different floor? No, Marcus said quietly. It was definitely the war room. He thanked the security supervisor and ended the call, feeling increasingly unsettled. Sarah looked up from her computer with excitement. Marcus, I think I found something. Our primary source for Morrison competitive analysis has been sending reports for the past 6 months, but when I trace the data back to its origin, there are some anomalies in the verification chain. What kind of anomalies? The information appears to come from multiple independent sources, but when you examine the metadata and timing patterns, it looks like it might all be originating from a single source using different channels to create the illusion of independent verification. Thomas nodded eagerly. That would explain how someone could feed us systematically incorrect information while making it seem credible. If they controlled multiple information channels, they could create false confirmation of their data. Marcus felt a growing sense of dread. Who would have the capability to manipulate our intelligence network so comprehensively? It would require someone with extensive knowledge of our information gathering processes, Dr. Mitchell replied grimly. They would need to know exactly which sources we rely on, how we verify data, and what kind of information would influence our decision-making. An inside job, James concluded. The implications were staggering. If someone within Blackstone had been deliberately sabotaging the Morrison acquisition, it suggested a level of corporate espionage that went far beyond normal competitive intelligence. But who would have both the access and the motivation to orchestrate such an elaborate deception? Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The maps don't lie, but people often do. If you want to understand what really happened this morning, meet me in the parking garage, level B3, northwest corner, in 15 minutes. Come alone. Marcus stared at the message, his hands trembling slightly. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Someone had been watching the situation unfold and was now offering information. But the demand to meet alone in an isolated location suggested either someone with crucial information or someone setting a trap. I need to step out for a few minutes, Marcus told his team. Keep working on the source verification. I want a complete report ready before the board reconvenes. Level B3 of the parking garage was dimly lit and largely empty during business hours. Marcus's footsteps echoed off the concrete walls as he made his way to the northwest corner, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows between the support pillars. As he approached the designated meeting point, Marcus saw a figure standing beside a black sedan. It was the cleaning woman from the war room, but she had changed clothes. Instead of the gray uniform, she now wore a well-tailored business suit and carried herself with an entirely different bearing. Gone was the deferential posture of service staff, replaced by the confident stance of someone accustomed to authority. "Mr. Chun," she said as he approached, her voice carrying none of the subservient tone from their earlier encounter. "Thank you for coming." Marcus stopped about 10 feet away, his mind struggling to process the transformation. "Who are you?" "My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez," she replied. "I'm the Director of Strategic Intelligence for Harrison Holdings." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Harrison Holdings was William Harrison's private investment firm, the entity through which the CEO managed his personal portfolio and conducted business separate from Blackstone Industries. If this woman worked for Harrison personally, it meant she had access to information and authority that went far beyond normal corporate channels. "You're not a janitor," Marcus said, feeling foolish for stating the obvious. Dr. Vasquez smiled, and for the first time, Marcus saw genuine warmth in her expression. "No, Mr. Chen, I'm not. Though I must say, the uniform provides excellent camouflage for observing corporate behavior. You'd be amazed how much you can learn about people when they think you're invisible." "Why the deception? Why were you in the war room this morning?" "Because Mr. Harrison asked me to be there. He wanted an independent assessment of how you would handle unexpected pressure and whether you possessed the judgment necessary for advancement to senior leadership." Marcus felt the world tilting beneath his feet. The Morrison acquisition, was it all a test? "Not exactly," Dr. Vasquez replied. "The Morrison opportunity is real, and your research was actually quite good. However, the strategic maps have been displaying an alternative scenario for the past month, one where Yamamoto Industries has been moving aggressively to control Morrison's operational territory. But my team verified that Yamamoto has minimal presence in those regions." "Your team verified what they were allowed to see. Yamamoto has been conducting their expansion through shell companies and local partnerships that are nearly invisible to conventional intelligence gathering. They've been planning to announce their new Southeast Asian network next week, which would have made your Morrison acquisition either impossible or extremely costly." Marcus leaned against a concrete pillar, feeling physically ill. So the acquisition would have been a disaster. Without proper preparation, yes. But here's what makes this interesting, Mr. Chun. The strategic maps in the war room are not just displays. They're interactive intelligence systems that incorporate real-time data from sources most people don't even know exist. Those maps have been tracking Yamamoto's movements for months, updating automatically as new information becomes available. And I try to prevent you from maintaining them. Dr. Vasquez nodded. "You made assumptions about my role, and my knowledge without asking questions or seeking to understand the situation. When faced with resistance to your authority, your first instinct was to use physical force rather than intellectual inquiry. The criticism stung because Marcus recognized its accuracy. He had indeed reacted with ego and assumptions rather than curiosity and intelligence. What happens now? That depends on what you've learned from this experience. Mr. Harrison believes in developing talent, but he also believes that leadership requires humility, wisdom, and the ability to recognize when you don't have all the answers. Dr. Vasquez walked to her car and retrieved a leather portfolio. Inside this folder, you'll find a complete intelligence file on Yamamoto's Southeast Asian expansion. It includes their actual timeline, their partnership agreements, and, most importantly, their vulnerabilities. She handed him the portfolio. Yamamoto's rapid expansion has left them overextended in several key areas. With the right approach, the Morrison acquisition could be structured not just to avoid conflict with Yamamoto, but to exploit their weaknesses and establish Blackstone as the dominant player in the region. Marcus opened the portfolio and scanned the first few pages. The information was extraordinary in its detail and sophistication, revealing a level of intelligence gathering that made his team's efforts seem amateur by comparison. Why are you giving this to me? Because Mr. Harrison wants to see if you can adapt your strategy when presented with new information, and whether you can admit your limitations while leveraging available resources to achieve success. The board meeting resumes in 20 minutes. You have time to review the key points and develop a new approach to the Morrison presentation. But, Mr. Chun, Dr. Vasquez fixed him with those intelligent eyes that had unsettled him from their first encounter. This is your last chance to demonstrate leadership potential. Use it wisely. As Dr. Vasquez drove away, Marcus remained in the parking garage, reading through intelligence reports that revealed a corporate landscape far more complex than he had imagined. Yamamoto's expansion was indeed happening, but it was also creating opportunities for a competitor clever enough to exploit their strategic mistakes. For the first time in his career, Marcus realized that true corporate intelligence was not about having all the answers, but about knowing where to find them and being humble enough to ask for help when needed. The strategic maps in the war room were not just displays. They were windows into a world of information that he had barely begun to understand. As he prepared to return to the board meeting, Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and terror. He had been given a second chance, but he also knew that his entire future depended on his ability to demonstrate that he had learned from his mistakes. The Golden Boy was about to discover whether he could become something more valuable, a true leader who understood that strength comes not from never falling, but from learning how to rise again with greater wisdom than before. Marcus Chun returned to the war room with 15 minutes remaining before the board reconvened, his mind racing with the implications of Dr. Elena Vasquez's revelations. The leather portfolio tucked under his arm felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, containing information that could either salvage his career or expose just how unprepared he had been for the complexities of corporate warfare. The strategic maps on the wall now looked entirely different to him. Where he had once seen static displays of corporate relationships, he now understood them as living, breathing intelligence systems that captured the pulse of global business in real time. The red lines indicating Yamamoto Industries' expansion no longer seemed like obstacles to his plans, but rather like warning signals he should have heeded from the beginning. Marcus spread the contents of Dr. Vasquez's portfolio across the conference table, his eyes scanning documents that revealed a level of strategic thinking he had never encountered before. Yamamoto's Southeast Asian expansion was indeed massive in scope, but it was also deeply flawed in execution. Their rapid growth had created numerous vulnerabilities that a properly planned acquisition could exploit. According to the intelligence reports, Yamamoto had prioritized speed over sustainability in their expansion. They had secured partnerships with local manufacturers through generous terms that were profitable in the short term, but financially unsustainable over longer periods. Within 18 months, Many of these partnerships would become burdensome to Yamamoto, creating opportunities for competitors to offer more attractive alternatives. More significantly, Yamamoto's expansion had been financed through a complex web of short-term loans and credit arrangements that required them to maintain aggressive growth targets. Any disruption to their expansion timeline would create cascading financial pressures that could force them to abandon some of their new partnerships entirely. Marcus realized that Dr. Vasquez had given him more than just intelligence. She had provided him with a roadmap for transforming a potential disaster into a strategic masterstroke. The Morrison acquisition could be restructured not as a direct challenge to Yamamoto's expansion, but as a patient alternative that would become increasingly attractive as Yamamoto's financial pressures mounted. The sound of voices in the hallway announced the return of the board members. Marcus quickly organized the most crucial documents from the portfolio while sliding the rest into his briefcase for later review. He would have to present his revised strategy without revealing the source of his new information, a challenge that would require careful navigation of corporate politics and personal relationships. CEO William Harrison entered the war room with the measured stride of someone who had spent decades making decisions that affected thousands of employees and billions of dollars in assets. His expression was professionally neutral, but Marcus detected a slight tension around his eyes that suggested genuine concern about the Morrison situation. "I trust you've had time to resolve the discrepancies in your research," Harrison said as he took his seat at the head of the table. Marcus stood and activated the presentation system, but instead of returning to his original slides, he opened a new document he had hastily created during the recess. "Mr. Harrison, members of the board, I need to begin this session with an acknowledgement. Our initial analysis of the Morrison acquisition was incomplete." The admission sent a visible ripple of surprise through the room. In corporate culture, admitting error was often viewed as a sign of weakness, particularly when seeking approval for major initiatives. But Marcus had learned something crucial from his encounter with Dr. Vasquez. True strength sometimes required the courage to acknowledge limitations. However, Marcus continued, "This incomplete analysis has led to a far more interesting opportunity than we originally identified." He activated a new slide that showed a revised timeline for the Morrison acquisition, one that extended the integration process over 2 years rather than the originally planned 18 months. "Rather than rushing to complete this acquisition, I propose that we adopt a more strategic approach that takes advantage of changing market conditions in Southeast Asia." Margaret Phillips frowned. "Marcus, delayed timelines usually indicate problems with due diligence or financing. What specific market conditions are you referring to?" Marcus had anticipated this question. "Our extended research has revealed that several major competitors, including Yamamoto Industries, have been expanding rapidly in the Morrison operational zones. However, this expansion appears to be financially unsustainable in the long term." He clicked to the next slide, which showed a graph depicting projected financial pressures on rapid expansion models. The data came directly from Dr. Vasquez's portfolio, but Marcus presented it as the result of additional analysis by his team. Yamamoto's expansion strategy requires them to maintain growth rates of at least 20% annually to service their expansion financing. Historical analysis suggests that such growth rates are impossible to sustain beyond 24 months in manufacturing-based markets. Dr. Elizabeth Warren leaned forward with interest. "Are you suggesting that we wait for Yamamoto to encounter financial difficulties before proceeding with Morrison?" "Not exactly," Marcus replied. "I'm suggesting that we structure the Morrison acquisition to position ourselves as the preferred alternative when Yamamoto's partners begin seeking more sustainable relationships." Marcus clicked to a slide showing a detailed timeline that synchronized the Morrison acquisition with projected pressure points in Yamamoto's expansion. "By timing our integration carefully and offering Morrison's existing partners the kind of stable, long-term relationships that Yamamoto cannot provide, we can essentially inherit the market presence that Yamamoto is creating at their own expense." Robert Sterling studied the financial projections on his tablet. "This approach would require significantly more patience and initial investment than our original plan. What's the projected return on this extended strategy? Marcus had spent his brief preparation time running calculations based on Dr. Vasquez's intelligence, and the numbers were remarkable. Conservative projections suggest a return of 300% over 5 years, compared to the 150% we projected with the original acquisition timeline. The room fell silent as the board members absorbed the implications of what Marcus was proposing. Instead of a straightforward acquisition and integration, he was outlining a complex strategic campaign that would unfold over years and require careful timing to succeed. Harrison stood and walked once again to the strategic maps on the wall. Marcus watched nervously as the CEO studied the displays that had revealed his original plan's flaws. Marcus, this revised strategy is considerably more sophisticated than your initial proposal. What prompted such a dramatic change in approach? This was the moment Marcus had been dreading. He could not reveal his encounter with Dr. Vasquez without exposing the fact that his original presentation had been fundamentally flawed. But he also could not lie to the board about the source of his strategic insights. Sir, the discrepancy between our research and the information displayed on these strategic maps forced me to reconsider our assumptions about the competitive landscape. When I examined the data more carefully, I realized that we had been looking at the Southeast Asia market as it was 6 months ago, rather than as it is today. Harrison nodded slowly, and this updated analysis suggests that Yamamoto's expansion actually creates opportunities for us rather than obstacles. Exactly. Yamamoto is essentially spending their resources to develop market relationships that we can acquire at a fraction of the cost once their financial model becomes unsustainable. Dr. Warren consulted her notes. This strategy assumes that Yamamoto will indeed encounter financial difficulties. What if they find ways to refinance their expansion or reduce their operating costs? Marcus had found the answer to this question in Dr. Vasquez's portfolio, though he could not acknowledge the source. Our analysis indicates that Yamamoto's expansion is dependent on maintaining partnerships with at least 15 local manufacturers. Even if they resolve their financing issues, the geographical distribution of these partnerships creates logistical challenges that become more expensive over time. He clicked to a map showing the location of Yamamoto's partners relative to transportation infrastructure. The costs of coordinating this network will increase by approximately 12% annually, regardless of their financing situation. Eventually, the partnership model becomes economically unviable. Margaret Phillips raised her hand. What's our contingency plan if this strategy fails? If we've committed significant resources to a 2-year timeline and Yamamoto proves more resilient than expected? Marcus felt a moment of panic. Dr. Vasquez's portfolio had focused on exploiting Yamamoto's weaknesses, but had not addressed potential contingencies if those weaknesses proved less significant than anticipated. This was exactly the kind of question that separated experienced executives from ambitious ones. An excellent question, Marcus said, buying time to think. Our contingency planning identifies 3 potential pivot points during the first year where we can accelerate the acquisition timeline if market conditions change unexpectedly. He improvised quickly, drawing on his general knowledge of corporate strategy to outline fallback positions. If Yamamoto successfully addresses their financial challenges within the first 12 months, we can complete the Morrison integration ahead of schedule and compete directly for market share. If they collapse more rapidly than projected, we can accelerate our partnership discussions to capture market opportunities immediately. Harrison returned to his seat, his expression thoughtful. Marcus, this revised strategy represents a significant evolution in your thinking. I'm curious about the intelligence sources that led to these insights. Our strategic planning depends on the quality of information we receive. Marcus felt sweat beginning to form on his forehead. Harrison's question seemed to probe directly at his encounter with Dr. Vasquez, though he could not be certain whether the CEO was testing his honesty or genuinely seeking information about intelligence sources. Sir, this analysis draws on multiple information streams, including the real-time intelligence displayed on our strategic maps, supplementary research from our competitive analysis team, and financial modeling based on historical precedents. It was technically truthful without revealing the specific source of his insights. Marcus hoped it would satisfy Harrison's curiosity without exposing the complex web of testing and evaluation that had apparently been surrounding him throughout the morning. Harrison studied him for a long moment. Very well. I'd like each board member to have time to review the revised proposal individually before we make a final decision. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock for a final vote. As the board members gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Harrison approached Marcus privately. "Walk with me to my office," he said quietly. Marcus followed the CEO down the hallway, his mind churning with uncertainty about what Harrison wanted to discuss. The older man's demeanor was professionally cordial, but revealed nothing about his thoughts regarding the revised Morrison strategy. Harrison's corner office occupied the northeast corner of the 49th floor, with panoramic windows offering views of the city that stretched to the horizon. The office was decorated with artifacts from Harrison's decades in corporate leadership, photographs with world leaders, awards from business organizations, and a collection of books on strategy and leadership that filled an entire wall. "Sit down, Marcus," Harrison said, gesturing to a pair of leather chairs arranged near the windows. "We need to have a candid conversation." Marcus settled into one of the chairs, trying to project confidence despite the uncertainty churning in his stomach. Harrison sat across from him, his expression becoming more personal and less formally corporate. "Your performance this morning was interesting," Harrison began. "Your initial presentation was well prepared and professionally executed, but it was based on incomplete information. Your revised strategy, however, demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that I hadn't previously seen from you." Marcus waited, unsure whether this was leading to praise or criticism. More importantly, Harrison continued, "You demonstrated the intellectual honesty to acknowledge when your analysis was flawed and the adaptability to develop a superior alternative. Those qualities are essential for senior leadership." Relief began to wash over Marcus, but Harrison held up a hand to indicate he wasn't finished. "However, I'm also aware that your revised strategy was developed with access to intelligence sources that weren't available to your original research. I want to understand how you plan to handle situations where such resources might not be accessible." Marcus realized that Harrison knew about his encounter with Dr. Vasquez, though the CEO wasn't stating this knowledge directly. This was another test, one that required him to demonstrate wisdom about leveraging available resources while maintaining intellectual independence. "Sir, today's experience taught me that effective leadership requires both the humility to recognize the limitations of your knowledge and the initiative to seek out better information when it's available. I can't guarantee access to superior intelligence in every situation, but I can commit to never again making crucial decisions based on assumptions rather than verified facts." Harrison smiled for the first time since their conversation began. "That's exactly the kind of answer I was hoping to hear. Marcus, corporate leadership is not about being the smartest person in the room or having all the answers. It's about making the best decisions possible with whatever information you can gather and having the courage to change course when new facts emerge." As Marcus prepared to leave Harrison's office, the CEO handed him a small card with an address written on it. "Dr. Vasquez would like to meet with you again this evening. I think you'll find the conversation educational." Marcus looked at the address, recognizing it as belonging to one of the city's most exclusive private clubs. "Sir, should I know who Dr. Vasquez really is?" Harrison's smile became enigmatic. "Marcus, in this business, the most important people are often the ones you never see coming. Tonight, you'll begin to understand just how much you still have to learn about how power really works in the corporate world." As Marcus left the office, he realized that his encounter with the woman he had dismissed as a janitor was just the beginning of an education that would challenge everything he thought he knew about success, strategy, and the invisible networks that shaped the business world. The Meridian Club occupied the top 3 floors of a historic building in the city's financial district, its understated elegance serving as a meeting place for individuals whose influence extended far beyond their public profiles. Marcus Chun had heard of the club, but never imagined he would have occasion to visit it. As he approached the discreet entrance that evening, he wondered what new revelations awaited him in his rapidly expanding education about corporate power structures. The lobby was appointed with the kind of quiet luxury that signaled serious money and serious discretion. A concierge in an impeccably tailored suit reviewed Marcus's credentials against a private list before directing him to an elevator that required a special key to access the upper floors. Dr. Elena Vasquez was waiting for him in a private dining room on the top floor, but she was not alone. Seated around a mahogany table were 5 other individuals, each of whom Marcus recognized as major figures in the corporate world. The gathering felt less like a business dinner and more like a meeting of some secret society that operated behind the scenes of public commerce. Mr. Chun, Dr. Vasquez rose to greet him. "Thank you for joining us. I'd like you to meet some colleagues who have been following your career with interest." The introductions that followed left Marcus feeling increasingly out of his depth. David Kim was the Chief Technology Officer of Meridian Dynamics, one of the world's largest consulting firms. Sarah Chun, no relation, despite the shared surname, served as Deputy Director of the International Trade Commission. Dr. Michael Torres was a former CIA analyst who now ran a private intelligence firm that served Fortune 500 companies. Janet Morrison held a senior position at the Federal Reserve, while Robert Zhang was the founder of one of Silicon Valley's most successful venture capital firms. "Please sit down, Dr." Vasquez indicated an empty chair that had been positioned at one end of the table. "We have a great deal to discuss." Marcus took his seat, feeling like a student who had somehow wandered into a faculty meeting at a university far beyond his academic level. The individuals around the table represented decades of experience in intelligence, finance, technology, and government regulation. Their presence together in this setting suggested coordination and communication that operated entirely outside normal corporate channels. "Mr. Chun," David Kim began, "your presentation to the Blackstone board today was quite impressive. Your ability to adapt your strategy in response to new intelligence shows promise for the kind of work we do here." Marcus found his voice carefully. "What kind of work is that exactly?" Dr. Vasquez answered. "We represent a network of professionals who share information and coordinate strategies across multiple industries and sectors. Our goal is to ensure that major corporate decisions are made with access to the most complete intelligence possible." "You mean corporate espionage?" Marcus asked. Sarah Chun laughed, though not unkindly. "Not espionage, Mr. Chun. Think of it more as collaborative intelligence. In today's global economy, the traditional boundaries between corporations, governments, and financial institutions are increasingly artificial. Major decisions in one sector inevitably affect all the others." Dr. Torres leaned forward. "Consider the Morrison acquisition you presented today. On the surface, it appears to be a straightforward corporate transaction, but the implications extend far beyond Blackstone's balance sheet." He gestured to a wall-mounted display that Marcus had not noticed upon entering. The screen showed a complex diagram that looked similar to the strategic maps in Blackstone's war room, but with far more detail and additional layers of information. Morrison Industries holds patents that could influence the development of battery technology for the next decade, Dr. Torres continued. Those patents affect not just corporate profits, but energy policy, environmental regulations, international trade agreements, and geopolitical relationships between the United States and Southeast Asian nations. Janet Morrison nodded. "The Federal Reserve has been monitoring potential acquisitions in the battery technology sector because they could affect currency stability in emerging markets. Yamamoto Industries' expansion, for example, has been partially financed through currency speculation that creates volatility in regional exchange rates." Marcus stared at the display, beginning to understand the vast complexity of interconnections that his Morrison analysis had never considered. You're saying that corporate acquisitions are actually geopolitical events? In many cases, yes, Robert Jean replied. When I evaluate investment opportunities in Silicon Valley, I'm not just looking at potential returns for my fund. I'm considering how those investments might affect technological innovation, national security, international competitiveness, and dozens of other factors. Dr. Vasquez stood and approached the wall display. The strategic maps in Blackstone's war room show a simplified version of what we monitor here. Our network tracks relationships and influences across corporate, governmental, and financial sectors in real time. She touched the screen, and the diagram zoomed in on a section showing Blackstone Industries' position relative to other entities. Marcus could see lines of connection extending far beyond what he had imagined, linking Blackstone to government agencies, foreign corporations, academic institutions, and financial organizations around the world. Your Morrison acquisition, Dr. Vasquez continued, would affect trade relationships between the United States and Vietnam, patent licensing agreements that impact European automotive manufacturers, rare earth mineral extraction in Africa, and currency exchange rates across Southeast Asia. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the scope of what he was seeing. How do you track all of this? The amount of information involved must be staggering. David Kim smiled. That's where technology becomes crucial. We've developed artificial intelligence systems that monitor thousands of information sources simultaneously, identifying patterns and relationships that human analysts could never detect manually. But technology alone isn't sufficient, Dr. Torres added. The most important intelligence often comes from human sources who understand the subtleties of personal relationships, cultural contexts, and unstated motivations. Sarah Chun gestured toward Dr. Vasquez. Elena's work at Harrison Holdings is just one example. She maintains relationships with key decision-makers across multiple industries, gathering intelligence that would never appear in public reports or official documents. Marcus began to understand why Dr. Vasquez had been in the war room that morning disguised as cleaning staff. Her role was not just to gather information, but to observe behavior and assess character under pressure. His reaction to her presence had been as much a part of her intelligence gathering as any documents or data she might have accessed. Why are you telling me this? Marcus asked. What do you want from me? Dr. Vasquez returned to her seat. Mr. Chun, your experience today demonstrated both the limitations of conventional corporate intelligence and your potential to adapt when presented with better information. We're always looking for talented individuals who can contribute to our network. But, more specifically, Janet Morrison added, we need someone inside Blackstone who can help us monitor the implications of major acquisitions before they're announced publicly. Your position gives you access to strategic planning that could affect multiple sectors. Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The opportunity to be part of such a sophisticated intelligence network was professionally thrilling, but the implications were also somewhat frightening. What would you expect me to do? Nothing that would compromise your loyalty to Blackstone, Robert Jean assured him. We're not asking you to steal secrets or sabotage corporate plans. We simply want advance notice of major strategic decisions so we can assess their broader implications. Dr. Torres pulled out a tablet and showed Marcus a secure messaging application. This system allows network members to share information anonymously and securely. You would report significant developments at Blackstone, and in return, you would receive intelligence that could help you make better strategic decisions. Like the information that saved your Morrison presentation today, David Kim pointed out. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. Mr. Chun, the corporate world is more interconnected than most people realize. The decisions you make at Blackstone don't exist in isolation. They ripple through financial markets, affect government policies, and influence the lives of millions of people around the world. She gestured to the wall display. Our network exists to ensure that those decisions are made with full awareness of their consequences. We're not trying to control corporate behavior, but We're trying to prevent the kind of systemic mistakes that can damage entire economies. Marcus studied the faces around the table, recognizing the intelligence and experience that each person brought to this hidden network. The opportunity to be part of such a group was unprecedented in his career, but he also understood that accepting would fundamentally change his relationship with Blackstone and his role in the corporate world. What happened to my research team's intelligence sources? Marcus asked. How was someone able to feed us false information about Yamamoto's expansion? Dr. Torres exchanged glances with Dr. Vasquez before answering. Yamamoto Industries has its own intelligence network, though not as sophisticated as ours. They've been systematically feeding disinformation to their competitors, including Blackstone, to create strategic confusion while they complete their expansion. Your team wasn't incompetent, Saracen added. They were the victims of a deliberate disinformation campaign. Without access to the kind of multi-source intelligence we maintain, it would have been nearly impossible to detect the deception. Marcus realized that his encounter with Dr. Vasquez had not just saved his presentation. It had revealed the existence of an entirely different level of corporate competition that he had never imagined. How many companies are engaged in this kind of intelligence warfare? More than you might think, Robert Jean replied. In today's global economy, information advantage can be worth billions of dollars. Every major corporation maintains some form of competitive intelligence operation. Dr. Vasquez stood again, signaling that the meeting was approaching its conclusion. Mr. Chun, we're not asking for an immediate decision. Take time to consider what we've discussed tonight. The invitation to join our network will remain open. She handed him a secure phone. This device will allow you to contact me directly if you decide you're interested in learning more. It's also equipped with encryption software that will protect any communications you might need to send. As the other network members began to gather their materials, Marcus realized that his understanding of corporate power had been fundamentally transformed in the span of a single day. The world he had inhabited that morning, where success was measured by quarterly results and strategic thinking extended only a few years into the future, now seemed naive and limited. There's one more thing you should know, Dr. Vasquez said as Marcus prepared to leave. Your performance in tomorrow's board meeting will be closely watched, not just by Blackstone's leadership, but by several other organizations that have an interest in the Morrison acquisition. Marcus felt a chill of concern. What kind of organizations? The kind that prefer to remain anonymous, David Kim answered cryptically. But don't worry. As long as your decisions are based on sound intelligence and genuine strategic thinking, you'll have nothing to fear. As Marcus left the Meridian Club and walked through the city streets toward his apartment, he felt like a different person than the confident executive who had entered Blackstone's war room that morning. The corporate world that had once seemed straightforward and predictable now appeared to be layer upon layer of hidden networks, competing intelligence operations, and strategic considerations that extended far beyond quarterly profit reports. The secure phone in his pocket felt like a gateway to a new kind of professional life, one where the stakes were higher and the game more complex than anything he had previously imagined. Tomorrow's board meeting would not just determine the fate of the Morrison acquisition. It would reveal whether Marcus Chun had the wisdom and courage to navigate the sophisticated world of power he had just discovered. The Golden Boy was about to learn that in the highest levels of corporate leadership, success required more than intelligence and ambition. It required the ability to see patterns that others missed, to understand connections that others ignored, and to make decisions that served interests far broader than any single company's bottom line. Marcus Chun arrived at Blackstone Industries the following morning with a fundamentally altered perception of his role in the corporate ecosystem. The secure phone from Dr. Vasquez felt heavy in his pocket, a tangible reminder of the hidden networks that operated behind the facade of normal business operations. As he rode the elevator to the 48th floor, Marcus wondered whether the other passengers had any awareness of the complex intelligence operations that influenced the decisions made in the building's upper floors. The war room looked the same as it had 24 hours earlier, but Marcus now understood the strategic maps on the wall as something far more sophisticated than mere displays. They were windows into a world of interconnected relationships, competing interests, and geopolitical implications that extended far beyond corporate profit and loss statements. The board members assembled with their usual professional efficiency, but Marcus detected subtle tensions that had not been apparent the previous day. Margaret Phillips seemed more alert than usual, frequently checking her phone for messages. Robert Sterling carried additional documents that he guarded carefully, and Dr. Elizabeth Warren appeared to be monitoring someone's arrival rather than focusing on the meeting agenda. CEO William Harrison entered precisely at 9 o'clock, but he was followed by two individuals Marcus did not recognize. The first was an older Asian man in an impeccably tailored suit who carried himself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to wielding significant power. The second was a woman in her 40s whose professional appearance could not entirely conceal the watchful intensity of someone trained in security or intelligence work. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison announced, "before we proceed with the Morrison acquisition vote, I'd like to introduce two observers who will be joining us this morning. Mr. Kenji Yamamoto is the chairman and CEO of Yamamoto Industries, and Ms. Patricia Williams represents certain governmental interests that have a stake in today's decision." Marcus felt his blood pressure spike at the mention of Yamamoto's name. The revelation that their primary competitor CEO was present for Blackstone's acquisition vote suggested a level of corporate coordination that went far beyond normal business practices. Yamamoto took a seat at the far end of the table, his expression pleasant but unreadable. Ms. Williams positioned herself near the wall, where she could observe everyone in the room without being the focus of attention herself. "Mr. Chun," Harrison continued, "I believe you have a final presentation to make regarding the Morrison acquisition strategy." Marcus activated the presentation system, but instead of displaying his prepared slides, he found himself accessing the secure intelligence reports he had received from Dr. Vasquez. The decision to reveal this information to the board, particularly with Yamamoto present, would either demonstrate his value as a strategic thinker or expose him as someone who had access to unauthorized intelligence sources. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, "yesterday's analysis revealed that the Morrison acquisition exists within a much more complex competitive landscape than we initially understood. However, this complexity also creates opportunities for strategic coordination rather than destructive competition." He activated a slide showing Yamamoto Industries' expansion timeline alongside Blackstone's proposed acquisition schedule. Mr. Yamamoto's company has invested heavily in Southeast Asian market development over the past 18 months. Their expansion has created infrastructure and partnerships that could complement Morrison's manufacturing capabilities rather than competing with them. Marcus glanced at Yamamoto, whose expression remained professionally neutral. Rather than viewing this as a zero-sum competition between Blackstone and Yamamoto, I propose that we consider a collaborative approach that maximizes the strategic value of both companies' investments in the region. The room fell completely silent. The suggestion of collaboration between major competitors was unusual enough in normal circumstances, but proposing such coordination in the presence of the competing CEO was unprecedented. Dr. Warren was the first to respond. "Marcus, are you suggesting some form of joint venture or a strategic partnership?" "I'm suggesting that we structure the Morrison acquisition to create complementary rather than competing market positions. Yamamoto has developed supplier relationships in the northern provinces, while Morrison's strength lies in the central and southern regions. Rather than duplicating infrastructure investments, both companies could benefit from coordinated operations." Margaret Phillips frowned. Such coordination would require extensive regulatory review and approval. The antitrust implications alone could delay implementation for years. Ms. Williams spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "Actually, certain governmental agencies would view strategic coordination in the battery technology sector as preferable to destructive competition that might compromise American technological leadership in emerging markets." Marcus realized that his instinct to propose collaboration had been correct, but for reasons he was only beginning to understand. The Morrison acquisition was not just a corporate transaction. It was a piece in a much larger geopolitical strategy involving American economic competitiveness in Asia. Yamamoto leaned forward slightly. Mr. Chin's analysis is perceptive. Yamamoto Industries has indeed encountered some of the financial pressures he described in his intelligence reports. However, these pressures also create opportunities for strategic partnerships that could benefit all parties involved. Harrison stood and walked to the strategic maps on the wall. Marcus, your proposal represents a fundamental shift from competitive acquisition to collaborative strategy. What specific structures would you recommend for implementing such coordination? Marcus had not prepared detailed implementation plans, but his evening with Dr. Vasquez's network had given him insights into how such complex arrangements typically functioned. I recommend a three-tiered partnership structure. First, technical coordination through shared research and development in battery technology. Second, operational coordination through complementary manufacturing and distribution networks. Third, financial coordination through joint investment in infrastructure projects that benefit both companies. Robert Sterling consulted his tablet. Such a structure would require careful financial modeling to ensure equitable risk and return distribution. Do we have sufficient information to evaluate the economic viability of this approach? Marcus hesitated, knowing that his answer would reveal the extent of his access to intelligence beyond normal corporate channels. Our analysis suggests that coordinated operations could reduce both companies' capital requirements by approximately 30%, while increasing market penetration by 50% over 5 years. The specific numbers came from Dr. Vasquez's intelligence reports, but Marcus presented them as if they were the result of Blackstone's internal analysis. He was walking a dangerous line between leveraging superior information and exposing his connection to external intelligence networks. Ms. Williams consulted her phone briefly before speaking again. The regulatory environment for such partnerships has become more favorable recently, particularly for arrangements that strengthen American technological competitiveness. Expedited approval processes are available for qualifying strategic collaborations. Marcus began to understand that the meeting was unfolding according to a script he had not been given. The presence of Yamamoto and Ms. Williams, Harrison's careful orchestration of the discussion, and the alignment between his strategic proposals and governmental preferences suggested that today's decision had been coordinated far in advance. Dr. Warren addressed Yamamoto directly. Sir, would your company be interested in exploring the collaborative approach Mr. Chun has outlined? Yamamoto smiled slightly. Yamamoto Industries has been hoping for an opportunity to discuss such collaboration with Blackstone for several months. Your company's strategic capabilities and our operational experience in Asian markets could create significant synergies. Marcus realized that his entire experience over the past 2 days had been carefully orchestrated. His encounter with Dr. Vasquez, his introduction to the Hidden Intelligence Network, and even his proposal for collaborative strategy had all been guided by forces operating far above his level of awareness. Harrison returned to his seat. Marcus, I believe your strategic thinking has evolved considerably since yesterday. Would you care to explain how you developed these insights into collaborative approaches? The question was a test, and Marcus understood that his answer would determine not just the fate of the Morrison acquisition, but his own future role in the corporate intelligence networks he had discovered. Sir, yesterday's experience taught me that effective strategic thinking requires looking beyond conventional competitive frameworks. When I examined the Morrison situation from a broader perspective, considering geopolitical implications and long-term technological development rather than just short-term market competition, the advantages of collaboration became apparent. It was a carefully crafted answer that acknowledged his expanded understanding without revealing his specific sources of information. Ms. Williams stood and approached the strategic maps. Mr. Chun, your analysis aligns with broader governmental strategic priorities. Collaborative approaches to technological development in key sectors are increasingly viewed as essential for maintaining American competitiveness in global markets. She touched one of the map displays, and Marcus was astonished to see it respond to her access, revealing additional layers of information that had never been visible during his previous time in the war room. The display now showed connections between corporate entities and various government agencies, research institutions, and international organizations. The Morrison acquisition, restructured as a collaborative partnership with Yamamoto Industries, would support strategic objectives that extend far beyond either company's individual interests, Ms. Williams continued. Battery technology development affects energy independence, environmental policy, transportation infrastructure, and national security considerations. Marcus stared at the enhanced map display, realizing that the strategic maps he had studied for months were merely the public layer of a much more sophisticated intelligence system. The war room itself was apparently equipped with technology that revealed additional information when accessed by individuals with appropriate security clearances. Yamamoto nodded approvingly. Such collaboration would also strengthen technological partnerships between American and Japanese companies, supporting broader alliance relationships that serve both countries' strategic interests. Harrison stood again, signaling that the meeting was approaching its conclusion. The board will vote on Marcus's revised proposal for a collaborative Morrison acquisition structure. All in favor? Every hand around the table rose simultaneously, including Yamamoto's. The unanimity was so complete that Marcus realized the actual decision had been made long before the meeting began. Excellent, Harrison announced. Marcus, you'll lead the implementation team for this collaborative acquisition. Dr. Vasquez will serve as your liaison with external stakeholders, and Mr. Yamamoto's representatives will coordinate operational planning. As the meeting concluded and participants began to leave, Dr. Vasquez approached Marcus with a slight smile. Congratulations, Mr. Chun. You've successfully navigated your introduction to strategic thinking at the highest levels. Marcus looked around the emptying war room, understanding finally that his entire experience had been an elaborate recruitment and testing process. How long have you been evaluating me? Approximately 18 months, Dr. Vasquez replied. Your work on previous acquisitions demonstrated analytical ability, but we needed to assess your capacity for broader strategic thinking and your ability to handle complex intelligence operations. Harrison joined their conversation. Marcus, yesterday you pushed a janitor who wasn't actually a janitor. Today, you've proposed a collaborative strategy that serves interests you didn't even know existed 48 hours ago. The question now is whether you're ready to operate consistently at this level of sophistication. Marcus realized that his career at Blackstone was ending and a different kind of professional life was beginning. What exactly are you offering me? Dr. Vasquez handed him a new portfolio, this one containing documents with security classifications he had never seen before. The opportunity to help shape corporate decisions that affect global economic stability, technological development, and international relationships. The Morrison acquisition is just the beginning of your education. As Marcus left the war room for what he suspected might be the last time as a conventional corporate executive, he reflected on the journey that had begun with his dismissive treatment of someone he thought was beneath his notice. The woman he had pushed aside had been the gateway to a world where corporate strategy, government policy, and international relations intersected in ways that the business schools never taught. The golden boy had discovered that in the highest levels of power, success required more than intelligence and ambition. It required the wisdom to recognize that the most important people in any situation might be the ones you never see coming, and the humility to understand that true strategic thinking extends far beyond the boundaries of any single company or industry. Marcus Chun had learned the hardest lesson of corporate life. The people who appear to have the least power are sometimes the ones who control the game entirely. And sometimes being pushed backward is actually the first step toward moving forward into a larger world than you ever imagined possible.